Grasshopper Radio.
Just one more thing.
We're very lucky to have William Osborne with us today to talk about his career in screenwriting and now also as a children's novelist. I understand that you've written some comedy and some more serious work. Which one would you say is more rewarding to write?
Well, I'm struggling to think of the more serious work, but I certainly have written comedy, and I've written a lot of action films over the years. I've never written true drama. I personally always maintain that making people laugh is harder than making people cry, and so I would say comedy is much harder. But it's the poor relation when it comes to drama and theatre and television. It's always looked down on for some reason, but personally I find it more rewarding to make people laugh than cry. No disrespect to the dramatists out there, but it's always been my pleasure and my ambition to write as much comedy as I can. But since I've been writing children's books, then they obviously fall into their historical fiction mostly, and they're too quiet. Okay. So obviously the historical fiction is serious rather than humorous. Although I think any story you write, you should always try and find some humour in it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with that. All right. Maybe this is a bit of a tough one, but in light of recent news, do you think it's possible to disconnect a writer, a director, or an actor, their work with their personal lives and some scandals that might have come out about them, or allegations?
If you're referring to the kind of the Harvey Weinstein thing that has beset, particularly in Woody Allen, of course, has recently been in the news again. And there's Roman Polanski and all those characters. I think it's a very, very difficult question. And there's an argument that you judge an artist on his work and that alone. But I think we don't live in a world that is as simple as that and as straightforward as that. And I think that any person, whatever their job is, needs to be judged on the way they behave. So I don't think you get a get out of free jail card just because you're a great artist if you're being horrible to people. So that's my take on that.
I think especially with social media and stuff now, it's a lot more.
Well, social media just leaves me baffled. I'm afraid I'm still a relatively young parent, I like to think, but social media, it's a bit like how computers used to get twice as fast every year, and I always feel with social media it's getting twice as fast every year now, and I see my children who are teenagers now, and I am baffled by how many platforms there are now, and just the continuous wall of stuff that. Anyway, that's off the point and off your question. But I thought I'd throw that in anyway.
You've done lots of very well-renowned things like Thunderbirds, Twins, GoldenEye. What's the moment in your career that you've felt most proud of what you've created?
There's been a few moments when I've sold scripts that I've written myself which have never been made but have been original scripts, and I've sold them to big studios, which I've been very proud of. I sold a script called A Man Called Brown, which was a sort of action-adventure story, a sort of Sherlock Holmes character. I'm very proud of that original work because selling original work to big studios in Hollywood is almost gone now. I don't think you can do it really anymore. They're just not interested in buying original work. So I'm very proud of the original work I've sold, even if it's never been made into movies. Of the films that I've written and had made, and I've written probably 70 or 80 scripts, and probably only 12 to 15 have actually been made. There's a film called Grumpy Old Men, which not many people know about, which was with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, who were sort of legends that young people have never heard of. They're both dead now. They were in very famous films in the 50s and 60s, which again is ancient history. But I made a film with them where we all had to go and live on a frozen lake in Minnesota for 3 months. And that was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that. I had a writing partner when I first started out for many years, and we had a rule of thumb that we would always try and write films set in places we wanted to visit. So we were very lucky. We made films in Bermuda, in the Bahamas, in Toronto, all over the world. So if you want to be a budding screenwriter, I always think that's a good rule of thumb. Write a script where you want to get it made. So. I don't know if that partially answers the question.
What's the process from having an idea to getting a film made?
Well, the straightforward process is that you go in, you have an idea, it's a great idea, you go and see a studio executive and you pitch him the idea, and he says, I love this idea, go and write the script, and you come back sort of within 6 to 12 months, and the studio is happy with the script, and then they fire you and get someone else to rewrite it. I'm being flippant there, although that does happen. And then you attach talent and a director, and the film gets made, and that is a very simplistic diagrammatic scheme of how a film gets made. Of course, there are myriad different ways of doing it. There are nowadays, when I first started out in the film industry in Hollywood in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, the studios were still, they're still run by executives, but the creative executives sort of controlled the process. Most studios now, and they've contracted, again, when I was working out there were probably 30 or 40 entities that you could call a studio. Now there's probably 10. They are controlled really by the marketing department, and it's the marketing department that decides what films get made, how they get made, who's in them, and very often what the script should be. And again, screenwriting and screenplays in Hollywood have become much more simplistic over the years, and the product they put out is now essentially designed for young people, with a few scripts made every year that you could say were for slightly older audiences.
So do you feel that this might be a bit cynical, but the more successful you get at writing, the less control you actually have about what you wrote?
No, I don't think that's true. I think the contrary is true. I think the more successful you become at writing, in film, that may be true. Certainly, the more successful you become in writing in television, and when I say television, I don't really mean the BBC. I mean Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, all these big things. They are writer-driven industry, and so the writer has much more say in those industries than they do in the film industry, where we are still seen as an expendable piece of talent. The writer traditionally in the film industry is the only piece of talent you can fire, because once you've got a director attached and a star attached, the film is generally going. So if you fire them, you're in trouble because you've got a film. But the writer is the piece of talent that is there before the film gets going, so he is the one who is traditionally replaceable. But in television, what tends to happen is the writer controls the creative levers right up and through the production and beyond. So they will hire the director is beholden to them, they are normally the executive producer as well as the writer on the project. So it's been a kind of golden era this last 5-10 years for writers, because they've suddenly gone from being the least needed element to being the most needed element in terms of the new sort of world of television and downloadable programs.
Mm-hmm. Great. You've written for adults, obviously, as well as for children. What are the challenges of switching age brackets, and what are the main differences?
I think the way I approach writing and storytelling, because essentially that's what I am.
Mm-hmm.
Although that always sounds slightly pretentious when you say that, but you can't win anyway. If you call yourself an author, you sound pretentious. If you call yourself a storyteller, you sound pretentious. But I don't really find that I have to kind of switch gears, because really what determines what I do is the story I want to tell. And some stories I want to tell have a protagonist who's 13, and so naturally they fall or become stories for that audience and that age group. And some stories I want to tell have a protagonist or an antagonist who's an adult, and it always comes down to me: is this a story I want to tell? Is this a story I want to either read or go and watch on TV or the cinema? And that's what drives my original writing. Obviously, if I'm being hired to adapt a piece, then you know that's a different process anyway.
Okay. I understand you started out as a barrister and studying law. What made you change direction in your career so drastically?
Well, that's a good question. In fact, I studied law at Cambridge, and I was a member of the Footlights back in the glory days. Well, the Footlights still continues to be a very successful amateur society.
Yeah.
And so I was writing all the way through my time at Cambridge. And then after I left, I continued writing. I had a writing partner after I left, and we wrote 2 radio series while I was still training to be a barrister. And so I always kept my foot or my finger in that pie. And then what I've discovered was that the plan was I would, become a barrister, which I did become a barrister and qualified and practiced, and that would be my career. But in fact, at the back of my mind, during all my early 20s, I was secretly feeling that wasn't what I wanted to do, and so by having this other string to my bow, this writing, it enabled me when I was 24, 25 to make the decision I had to make, which was I going to be a character like John Mortimer, who was a very famous barrister who was also a very well-known writer, or was I going to just strike out and become a writer? And the fact that I only wanted to write American films and not British television or British films meant that I had a decision to make, and because I had to go to America to do that, and so I rush of blood to the head, as you have when you're in your 20s. I decided I'd become a writer instead, and I went out and followed my dream, as we like to call it.
Do you think that you've been able to transfer any skills from studying law or anything like that?
Well, it certainly helped when we were there in the early days reading contracts and understanding, and one certainly wasn't bowled over by agents or lawyers or all the other, I hesitate to use the word sharks, but the other things that are in the sea around you. The fact that I had trained as a lawyer and did understand media law and contract law stood me in good stead, I would say, and saved me quite a lot of money, actually. But in terms of writing, I don't think so, really. I mean, you have to write a lot as a barrister, and maybe there was that obviously gave me some confidence to feel that I could put pen to paper. And I did write a film called What Rats Won't Do, which was made, it was a romantic comedy made by Sky back in about 1998, somewhere like that, 20 years ago, God. And that was about 2 barristers in London who fall in love over a case. And that was actually very helpful, because the case was I think it was a probate case or something, and so I did understand the law, and I did understand the arguments that one had to write for the characters. And actually, that was a lot of fun. I kind of revisited my life as a barrister then, and we shot it all in the Temple in London, and it was with a very nice actress called Natasha McElhorn, who went on to be in a show called Californication.
Oh, yeah.
And I cannot remember the male actor, although he was not Rufus Sewell. It was one who looks like Rufus Sewell. Anyway, I'm sure your listeners won't be interested in the details.
I don't know about that. Are there any up and coming new writers that you're aware of?
Well, a great many actually. I think up and coming. I don't know. I don't have my ear to the ground like I should have really, but I know that it's a great time to be a writer. I mean, I think lots of people think, oh, the film industry is so hard to break into and so difficult in television, but there's a lot of new outlets there. There's the new media is opening up ways of writing. Television is certainly, Netflix and Amazon are giving loads of opportunities. But no, I can't. I mean, I know all the old talent, I'm afraid. I know the Peter Morgans who write The Queen, and he's been at it the same as long as I have. I think the great thing about writing is that, unlike a lot of things, you can keep going until, you run out of puff, but no one judges you as being too old to write, which is a very nice, place to be.
I think also with the internet becoming a more prevalent source for like amateur young filmmakers, I think it's quite a promising time in terms of YouTube and being able to upload things free to the internet and being able to get opinions and stuff.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the things I do up here, and been lucky enough to do for the last couple of years, is be a judge at the Norwich Short Film Festival. Okay. And watching those films that they send, and there's always 3 or 4 that are shot by people in Norfolk or from Norfolk, and they're fantastic. I mean, I saw one which I voted for actually. It didn't win sadly, which was a short film of a couple sort of having a row on Sheringham Beach, and it was all shot with an iPhone, and it was beautifully done. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic little 10-minute drama. And they used the iPhone brilliantly, even though it was on a fixed lens, and it was, you had to do quite long shots and long scenes. It was really, really good. And I think that, a bit like you're always told, the great filmmakers like Spielberg and everything else just picked up a camera and started shooting. Well, the opportunities to do that now with the technology you have in your hands is phenomenal.
Absolutely. You've obviously gone from being a screenwriter to also now writing novels. What would you say is the main... I know it seems like an obvious question, but what's the main difference between writing scripts and writing novels, aside from obviously one's for screen and one's...
Well, no, but it's a good question. I mean, you do have to approach it very differently. And my first novel I wrote, Hitler's Angel, still available now. I wrote it was very much like a screenplay turned into a novel, and my publishers, who are a brilliant company called Chicken House, my editor there kind of took me in hand and kind of gave me a kind of 15-minute lesson on how to, write a novel. You have to approach the form differently. Obviously, it's written either in the third or the first person. You have to focus on a protagonist. You can't, although some writers do, you can't just sort of cut away the whole time to different scenes and different places and different points of view. But so there's a different discipline involved. But I come back to what I said earlier. Essentially, all you're doing is storytelling anyway, whether you're telling a story. The economy of screenplay is that you don't need to use many words in a screenplay. And very often, the words that you do use, a good actor will lose anyway. You write dialogue, but a really good actor will take that dialogue and say, I don't need that dialogue, I'll just do it with a look, I'll do it with this. Yeah. Steve McQueen, a very famous old actor, he was very well known for looking at a script and saying, I don't need that line, I don't need that line, I don't need that line, I'll just do it with a look, or I'll do it with this, and I'll do it with a gesture. So obviously, if you're writing a novel, you would need a lot more words because you have to paint the picture. You can't just put exterior motel Los Angeles and rely on your director of photography and director to find a great motel and sunset in Los Angeles, and you have to obviously write it and make the reader feel that they're there. But I don't feel there is a big difference between the two things. I've switched between them both quite happily.
When you're writing scripts, do you have people in mind? Do you think, I want Stallone, I want Danny
Definitely. It depends. If you're writing... Very often, if you're writing a spec script, that's a script that you just write on speculatively to sell, you will create a character that is castable, put it that way. You unless you have a particularly really good relationship with an actor and they say, write something for me and I will do it, and they are sufficiently powerful for a studio to say, we'll green light that picture. No, you have to just, if you pick up any old screenplay, you can probably, and read a description of the main character, if it's a man or a woman, you can read it and think, it can be so-and-so, it can be, the 5 actors that still mean anything in Hollywood in terms of box office. And funnily enough, when I started out again, a lot of the creative decisions were driven by who was in the film, if it was Schwarzenegger or Stallone or Tom Cruise or whatever. And now I think that's even less so now, particularly with the creation of Marvel and those universes. They're all ensemble casts, and no one really seems to have, although the guy who played Iron Man I think is sort of head of the pack there, but no one really is more powerful than anyone else in those movies.
Absolutely. You mentioned Marvel, and it does seem nowadays that it's a lot about sequels and franchises and stuff. Do you think there's still a lot of good original scripts being made?
Well, you've got to look. I think there are. I don't think there are anything like the number that were being made when in I hate to say the golden age of cinema because every age has a golden age. But when I was writing back in the 90s and early noughties, if we call them that, there was an awful lot of original material out there, and you go further back, you go to the 70s, and of course, the 70s for me is the decade for Hollywood. It is, even more than the 60s, it is the greatest decade of filmmaking, because that's when the studios let original filmmakers have their head and make the films they wanted to make. I find it pretty depressing, modern filmmaking. I do think it is mostly about merchandising platforms. Those, all those Marvel films, they're entertaining. My sons love them. But they sell toys, they sell video games, they sell T-shirts. They're there to sell things, and I think there's a kind of soullessness to them.
I agree.
But there we are. Star Wars 25. We're rude about that, and we go, not another Star Wars. But then Bond's been going for 60 years, so it's kind of incredible. That is incredible. That's kept going.
When you've taken on something that's so loved by people like Thunderbirds or Bond or something, do you feel a certain responsibility to do it justice? No. And I think if you do, then you get sort of weighed down and thinking, it's what will the fans think, or what do people think? My take on Thunderbirds, because it was trying to reintroduce it to an audience that really didn't know it, back in whenever it was, 2004, 2005, was that we had to write essentially a children's film, and having 5 adult men and their dad was kind of weird. It was kind of weird when they made it, but when in the 60s as a kid you kind of got past it because they were puppets, you know what I mean? So you didn't. But if you had 5 actual adult men living on an island by themselves with their dad, it raised
rather a few too many troubling issues for me. So I pitched the story to the people who made it, that what we should do is we should make the youngest son much younger, a child still, and have two other children living on the island, the son of Brains, who I created, Fermat, and the girl, I can't remember her name now, awful brain freeze. And then I suggested what we need to do is get the dad and the older boys off the island, and then have some fun. So really, it was one of those lovely pitches where it doesn't happen so often, where you just go in and you go, I want to do Home Alone on Tracy Island. Yeah. And that was the pitch, Home Alone on Tracy Island. And you got to have the kids you needed, you got the world that you needed, you got all the great machines that you needed. Unfortunately, the film didn't work. It didn't work at the box office. It wasn't well loved, wasn't well received. Jerry Anderson, who created Thunderbirds, loathed it. Yeah. So, you do your best and you hope for the best, and some you win, some you lose. But I still maintain creatively that was the right decision.
Okay. Yeah, well, I grew up on that film.
Thanks, George.
I loved it very much. You mentioned earlier about wanting to write American films rather than British films. Is there that much of a difference between them?
There was when I started. If you go back to, I'm a very old, wizened, wise man now, but when I was out, sort of in my early 20s, which is when I was writing, this would have been sort of the mid-80s, previous century we're talking here. And at that time, there was a very clear distinction between the kind of films that England was making. They were making these films called Merchant Ivory films, which were very sort of period pieces, A Room with a View, and films you'd never have heard of, but all set in India or the 20s in England or Edwardian France or something like that. And there was a lot of that. Or there was very kind of really good, very trendy English films, the Sex Pistols and things like that. And A, my sensibility didn't lie there, but B, the kind of films I was watching at the time were things like Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, these great, big, enormously entertaining, expensive American comedies or action movies. And I just thought, I'll have a go at that, because I love those films and I'd love to write those films. I'd love to be part of the creative process that makes those films. Yeah. And it was a great time to be out there making those films, even the ones that didn't succeed. It was still fun to turn up and there'd be 300 people there and a tank, and and you thought, my God, I just put this on a typewriter and now we're all here. So it's a lot of fun, that.
So when you've written the script, that's not it. You are involved in the actual process.
Sometimes, I've worked with directors who wanted me there for the whole shoot. I work with directors who take the script and give you a hug and say, I'll see you at the end of the shoot, and that's it. It depends. It depends on the actors. Some actors like to have you around. You just don't know. As I say, the writer isn't really necessary. I mean, sometimes you're there for all the wrong reasons, because the film's going wrong and you're having to rewrite dialogue on the fly and everyone's unhappy and it's miserable, and sometimes you're there and it's just lovely and it's like being on holiday for 3 months and you just get to turn up and enjoy the process.
Do you ever find yourself too attached to a script, that when people start editing it down, that you feel that they're making the wrong decisions?
I never. Yes. Well, I often think people are making the wrong decisions, but I'm not too attached.
Okay.
Because you can't work in the film industry professionally as a writer unless you want to be a director or a producer. But if you just want to be a writer, you have to accept that, people can do whatever they want with your work at any stage. There's a very famous, Ben Hecht, I think, was a very, very famous writer in the 20s and 30s, in the great days of Hollywood, who wrote a letter to a friend in New York saying, if they traduce your work, they ridicule your ideas, they tear up your scripts when you write them, and what you get for it, a fortune. And he was being paid $100,000 a week
Mm-hmm.
back in the 20s, which would be equate to, several $1 million a
Mm-hmm.
week here nowadays. So, top writers still are very, very well paid
Mm-hmm.
for what they do.
Yep. Okay. Just one more thing. For people our age, now is a time when we have to make some really important life decisions in terms of choices, universities, subjects. Is there anything that you feel is necessary in terms of working in the film industry or becoming an author?
No, I don't. I think it's the old 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to work hard, and you just got to be determined, and you just got to accept, people saying no, it's not the answer you want. And there's no magic answer to getting to be into the industry. You've just got to knock on doors. You've just got to, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You can't. The worst thing I think a writer can do is say, I've got an idea, because we've all got ideas. But if you say, I've got a script, then someone will say, well, I'll read that.
Yeah.
But if you say, there's a fantastic Woody Allen film where a character goes around saying, I've got an idea that I'm going to work up into a notion that I hope to make into a concept. You know what I mean? And we can all do that all day long. But if you want to write. I think Mark Twain said that before me, and he was a lot more successful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, George.
Just one more thing.